About 9:03, so we'll call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is public comment. Is anybody out there that wishes to make public comment on the regular agenda? I love shaking no of heads. Okay, if that's the case, then we'll go ahead to our regular agenda. First item on the regular agenda is consideration of approving the May 13th minutes. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one clarification, please.
Okay.
It's noted as, to make sure that we are in compliance with the bylaws and such. Mr. Weiss is a vice chair and not a co-chair, as stated in the meeting minutes.
Correct. Okay.
Make that correction.
Do you have any objections to your name being associated with Vice?
It's under public comment, third paragraph. Okay. Any other corrections? There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Chuck?
Second.
Discussion? Any other further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Bill, update.
Mr. Chairman, it's good to see all of you. Glad you came back. Appreciate that. One thing before I get started is ask that when you speak, if you would please, I've asked it maybe to try to speak more directly into the microphone. That way we can pick it up better for the recording. So I appreciate that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time updating on where things are specifically with water. The presentation later is going to cover that in a little bit more specific detail. I think that you've all probably been keeping up with the lake levels and seeing how things have improved, and things have improved some. Unfortunately, as you know, the rain hasn't fallen in the best of locations for us to collect it in the reservoir. So while it has been an improvement, we're still in a situation where we need to continue to look for additional water resources. One thing that I'd like to do at this time, I think, is Mr. Jennings, of course, is a meteorologist involved with the weather modification. I'd like for him, if he would, to kind of give us his opinion and update of where things are today and in the near future, maybe the long-term outlook on the weather forecasting, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I often do a climate forecast or a climate outlook for the board members of the Weather Mod Board. So I'm always doing a lot of analogs or looking back into history and seeing what type of year that we are currently having and try to compare it to something in the past. Obviously, we are coming out of a drought period, or we might be just in the middle of a drought period with the 1 year anomaly for this wet season. Obviously, we're doing really well. We're probably about 180% of normal rainfall. I expect the trend to continue despite the dry start to June. I do expect us to continue to see wet conditions through the rest of the year, especially this fall. The climate models are really suggesting a very wet fall coming up ahead of us. And all this is likely due to a very strong and strengthening El Nino. And once that starts to fade away late in the year into early 2016, we will start to drop back into normal conditions. And normal in Texas is usually drought. So I do think it's good that we are all here continuing to look at other options for water supply in the city of San Angelo, because years like this are very rare. Another thing I wanted to mention, in 2007, the state of Texas had its wettest year on record. 4 years later, we had the worst 1 year drought on record. 4 years later is this year, 2015. We're having a pretty good year. So by the year 2019, we could be seeing another very dry period. So it shows how fast things can change in the Texas climate, and that things are very variable from year to year. So I think it's very good that we pursue other options, because the surface water supply is just not going to be reliable through time and as the population continues to grow.
Good. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Bill, please.
So with that, again, we've seen about, we're still at about 6% in Twin Buttes. We're about 14% in O.C. Fisher, and I think Ivy is about 15%. So while you look around the state and you see a lot of the lakes are full and spilling, we're still in a pretty serious situation, and of course in San Angelo and Abilene. So we want to continue looking at.
If I could just add on to that, just a comment, I want to make sure that what I'm deathly afraid of is that we had all these nice rains, O.C. Fisher finally has water, and people are going to get lulled to sleep, okay? And they're not going to pay as much attention as to the things that we need to be doing right now. I believe now that our job is as important as it ever was, not just as it was a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, but I believe it's ever more important now to be looking forward beyond all of this. I just don't want us to get lulled to sleep, and too many people that we're going to run into are going to get lulled to sleep. Oh, we're in great shape. The lakes are full. As you just said, they're not. So I think there, maybe some advice to the city and stuff, and to Anthony and whatnot, is put some PR out there to help emphasize that while thank God for the rain and we're blessed and we're in good shape, it's not a get out of jail free card. Just my comments.
I think you're right on, Mr. Hirschfeld. The reality is it bought us a few months to continue to make good decisions. It certainly didn't really change anything as far as where we're going in the future. So,
Yeah, I think if we could do some type of article through the news media talking about evaporation rate on a daily basis, and do some type of timeline based off of where we are today to tell everybody know how much we get out of the aquifer. I mean, people think that I've talked to that the aquifer is the answer to all, and we know it's not. It's 18%, roughly 18%. So we've got to piece it all together. So I think if we can put all the pieces together and start educating the public on, hey, where we are today, here's how far we can go, and then backpedal it from that, it would help if we go ahead and start educating everybody. I think it would help us make recommendations to council what we need to do and move forward.
you bet.
So I agree with you, Kendall.
You bet.
Please.
That's all I have on that item.
Okay. Let's move into
All right.
the reuse implementation plan.
Well, as we talked at the last meeting, the city did embark on a study on reclaimed water alternatives last year, and that study is winding down. We have a draft report, and consultants are going to present that today, and then we can follow that up with maybe some discussion on how to move forward. As they move through this, please feel free to engage and ask questions as we're going through this process. So what I'd like to do at this time is go ahead and introduce them to you and have them start the presentation. The firm, the consulting team was Allen Plummer Associates and EHT out of EHT's out of Abilene, Allen Plummer's out of the Dallas area. But with us today is Miss Ellen McDonald with Allen Plummer Associates. She was the lead on this project. Ellen is a PhD from Stanford. She is one of the leading experts in the area of developing the science for reuse projects. She's been working closely with the state recently in developing the criteria for how these projects will move forward. So we feel very fortunate to have had her as part of this project with the expertise that she brings to it. With her today is Mr. Scott Hibbs. He is the president of EHT. He went to that other school, Tech. Yeah, Texas Tech. I remember. Yeah. So, but anyway, if you would please just welcome them to come make this presentation.
Well, thank you, Bill. Really a pleasure to be here, and it's been a pleasure to work with the city on this project. It's incredibly important, I know, and we really do appreciate the opportunity to have been able to help with it. Bill mentioned that I've been working with the TCEQ and the Texas Water Development Board on a project to develop essentially a resource document related to reuse. I've been at Allen Plummer Associates for about 16 years, and I've been working on reuse projects since then. Allen Plummer himself, reuse is one of his passions, and he's passed that on to me. So I really have been staying in the loop and have supported a lot of communities, and I'm happy to support San Angelo too. And then just another little factoid about me. Before I joined Allen Plummer Associates, I was actually a professor, and so I love talking about stuff and teaching, and if you doze off, there may be a quiz, so be careful. But I do want this to be interactive, and ask me anything, and I've tried to give you an overview in this presentation, but any details that you want to dig into, I'm happy to get into them, so don't be afraid to stop me as I move along. Okay, so Bill, we had a discussion about water supply, and I put a few slides in here just to get us going. This graph shows the population growth projected in the 2012 State Water Plan, which is being updated currently. But you all know Texas is growing. We're projecting 4 to 5 million people, adding 4 to 5 million people every decade in Texas, and that requires that we have a good water supply, and that's statewide, but it applies to San Angelo as well. And that population, to support that population, we need water, of course, and this is also from the State Water Plan showing the existing supplies, which are in the blue, and then the actual demand that's needed to meet that growing population. And one thing I want to point out is that the existing supply, you can see that those bars are going down, and they're going down because our existing supplies, because of sedimentation in the reservoirs primarily, but also diminishing groundwater supplies, our existing supplies are going down. So even to maintain supply for our existing population, we have to find new water sources, and that's not unique to any place in the state. And so there's just a message here: you aren't alone in the world, that this is an issue throughout the state. I'm sure you all know that because we have such a large state, there's a tremendous amount of variability on precipitation in the state, and San Angelo is kind of right in that middle portion, moving towards the west, and the further west you go, the more challenging it is, especially if you're relying on surface water supplies that really rely on having precipitation, and you've seen that as an issue in the past, in the recent past. So I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you were to look at this map, you might actually think we're out of the drought. So this is the drought monitor, and it certainly right now, as of May 30th, looks a heck of a lot better than it did in 2011. And this is the issue that we were talking about earlier. If the public is looking at this map and they say, hey, look at all that red is gone, we're in the white, the drought is over. Well, this map is based on things like soil moisture, precipitation, stream flow. It doesn't take into account the water supply reservoirs and how much water is in the reservoirs. And so I do think that there needs to be good communication with the public about what the true situation is in terms of drought. If you look at this map, which shows the levels in the reservoirs throughout the state, the red being the lower reservoirs, that really tells the picture. So from a water supply perspective, the drought isn't over until those reservoirs are full at Conservation Pool, and not even close. So 83% of the state has reservoirs that are full, and these red dots on this map are what's bringing that down so that it's not 100%, and they're concentrated right in this area. And so communicating that to the public, that just because that drought monitor map says that we're out of the drought, that may be true for farmers and ranchers who are out there and are not relying on the supply from the surface water reservoirs. It's definitely not true in terms of water supply. And then Bill alluded to these. These are the capacities as of May 30th. They may have gone up a little bit since then, but you're talking, single digits for 2 of the supplies and 13 to 14% for the other 2. That's when the drought will be over. It's hard to see on the screen, but when the water level gets up to that red dashed line, that's conservation pool for each of the reservoirs. And you look at this, it's been a long time since any of these have been up that high. And so you need a lot of rain to fill these lakes up still. Okay, so looking at demand and what do you need to supply, these are the red line shows the demand over the last 5 years for San Angelo, and then I also plotted the bars are precipitation, because obviously the demand depends on the precipitation. In 2011, you would expect to have a higher demand because the precipitation was so low. But the good thing about this that I see when looking at this is that even though the precipitation had tailed off from 2012 to 2014, your demand wasn't going back up as much. So I think that people were taking to heart conservation, and we're trying to conserve water during that time. So you're looking at a demand right now of 14,000 to 15,000 acre feet per year, based on this data. Now this graph shows, this is information from the Region F water plan, and a couple of things about this. The bars show the existing supplies that are listed, and the quantities that are listed in that Region F water plan, and then the red line shows the projected demand. The red line is probably high because the demands that are used in the regional water plan are typically somewhat conservative. So you're probably not going to go from 15,000 acre feet a year up to 22,000 acre feet per year in the next 5 years. But nonetheless, there's a gap there. And so the point is that the existing supplies don't meet the projected demand, and there's a deficit. And that's what we're here today to talk about, is how do you meet that deficit? And if you look at, I just want to point out too, I know Bill talked to you about the Hickory Aquifer. The numbers that are in the plan kind of use an average number. There is potential for using the banked water from the Hickory and meeting some of that deficit, but that's not a long-term solution. That banked water is not going to be there forever, and so it can help in a period, but it's not a long-term solution.
So basically, your projections on the Hickory would be based upon the allocations that would be available. Is that a fair statement?
This number is kind of an average number based on those allocations,
Okay.
right? Okay. Right. Okay. Any questions on supply or what I've presented so far? Because we're going to get into the reuse discussion.
When you show those projected graphs on the different areas of water, does it take the evaporation into consideration? Does it have a heat index involved in it? When we have those 105 or 8 or 10 degree days again, that water goes down accordingly because of the evaporation rate?
Which projections are you referring to? I'm sorry.
I'm saying like Twin Buttes or anybody, or Fisher, if we lose 5 acre feet a day, or I don't even know what the number would be, but you multiply that times 3 or 4 different pools of water, does this graph take that into consideration, because it would be more drastic?
This does. So yes, on this graph, these supplies are considered to be the firm yield supply of each of these lakes, and they take into account water rights issues, evaporation, all those things. And so this is how much is projected that you would have in a drought situation. So if it rains, you can pull more out, but you're planning for a drought, right? That's when you need the water.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Sure. If you can back up the slide to the one that had the conservation pool.
This one?
Yes. So is there a rule of thumb on how much rain we would have to receive to reach the conservation pool? For example, 14-inch rain within 24 hours would get us to the conservation pool. Do you have that kind of number?
That can be generated. Of course, it's all about where the rain falls.
Correct.
So it has to fall in the watershed for that reservoir, but I don't have that number with me, but that can be, there are estimates, there are models that could estimate how much rain you have to get on the watershed and can calculate the runoff and how much flow it would take.
Because I think, just going along with what Mr. Hirschfield said, and that's important in terms of an awareness and education to the public. If we show that slide and we were to say, you know, for us to achieve that conservation pool, it would require a steady rain of 2 inches for 90 days or what have you. But I think it's important that they know that, yes, it's still serious and this is what it would require. So we
Right.
are still in a drought, and you can tell, you can show that, and you can also show the map that even though a portion of Tom Green County is now normal, but the other portion was abnormal dry. All of those are, I think, just key points to help educate the public.
Right, certainly agree. Okay, let's move on and talk about reuse then. So I'm going to start by just getting everybody up to speed. We tend to use some acronyms in reuse and talk about different types, and I want to make sure that everybody starts at the same level so that we can talk about your project. So starting with non-potable reuse. Non-potable reuse is when you take water from a wastewater treatment plant, treat it to a quality that can be used for non-potable applications like irrigation or cooling water or other industrial uses. And you can either pipe it directly to those uses to, say, a golf course, or you can discharge it in a river and then get a water right to pull it out again and then irrigate a golf course. So it can be either indirect, which is discharging it to the river, or it can be direct non-potable reuse. And I'm going to use those terms again in a minute when I'm talking about potable. So it's not for drinking, it's non-potable, not for drinking, and used for non-potable purposes. And there's a lot of that going on throughout the state in all kinds of places. I just put an example in here for the city of Fort Worth where, let's see if I can use this, their wastewater plant is here on the east side of Fort Worth, and they have a pipeline that sends water to Arlington to irrigate some parks and a golf course, and then another golf course in Euless, and then all the way up to the airport for irrigating green space. So that's a typical non-potable reuse project. So when you start talking about potable reuse projects can also be either indirect or direct, and it has to do with whether you are discharging to a river or a lake or an aquifer first and then diverting it downstream, or you're piping it directly to the water treatment facility. So in this case, with indirect potable reuse, you have your customers generating wastewater and you have wastewater treatment. Often there will be some additional treatment for an indirect reuse project. The wastewater is then discharged to a river or a reservoir and then diverted from that water body and goes through the conventional water treatment plant with the other raw water supplies and is distributed to the drinking water system and then goes back through the circle again. So it goes into the drinking water system, customers use it, and the wastewater is generated. So it cycles around, but it goes through what we call an environmental buffer, like a river or a reservoir, before it's diverted again. So that's indirect, and just an example close by of indirect reuse, the Abilene started an IPR project in January, and so they have a pipeline from their Hamby Water Reclamation Facility to Lake Fort Phantom Hill, and the water gets discharged into Lake Fort Phantom Hill, and then they have a water supply intake on the downstream side where they pull the water out. And
What river is that on?
it's on, help me out, Scott.
Well, would that be part of the Brazos?
It's a part of the Brazos, but it's on
Okay. I guess the difference I see in that versus kind of where we are, and I will just tell you what really concerns me about indirect is the sharing of the water rights. You
And-
put it in the lake, and now we've got, and I'm not trying to offend anyone on that, but we've got canal people, we've got downstream senior rights, we've got, you name it. And then once if it ever finally hits Ivy, then we only get basically a third of what goes down there. So that's going to be one of my concerns
Absolutely.
on the indirect route.
Right, and I'm just going through definitions here,
Understand.
not advocating anything. Abilene had a very different water rights situation. They have all the rights in Fort Phantom Hill. Water rights were not an issue for them, and that makes a huge difference.
Now, if
So
we happen to build another lake that we could do that on, giddy
you gotta have
up.
water to fill the lake.
Well, but you're going to lose half of it to evaporation after you treat it.
Okay, so that's indirect potable reuse, and then direct is essentially the same process, except instead of that environmental buffer, that lake, you're putting in some advanced treatment in its place and taking the water from the wastewater plant through some advanced treatment and then blending it with your other supplies in the water treatment plant and then back around through the system.
And maybe you'll get to this, but is the advanced treatment different from a direct or indirect?
It can be, yes. And for San Angelo, we looked at different treatment processes for each because there is value to time that water spends in a natural reservoir. There's natural treatment that goes on in the reservoir. And also, once you discharge it, you also have to worry about there are regulations about what the quality of that water in the reservoirs have to be. There's water quality standards, and you have to make sure that you meet those standards in addition to drinking water standards. So there's other water quality issues that come into play, or different water quality issues that come into play if you're discharging to a surface water body or taking it directly to the water plant. And so, yeah, we did look at different kinds of treatment. Okay, and so an example of a direct potable reuse project is right up the road in Big Spring with Colorado River Municipal Water District's project, where they take water from the Big Spring wastewater treatment plant. They call it a raw water production facility. This is where the advanced treatment occurs. Then they blend that water with raw water from their other reservoirs, and then that goes to their customers where it's then treated at their conventional water treatment plants. So it's direct because it's not discharged into one of these reservoirs. For example, it's not discharged to Spence, it's not discharged to Thomas or Ivy. It's blended in the pipeline. And so there's not any value of time in the reservoir for natural treatment. It's essentially going straight from this advanced treatment to the water treatment plant. In Wichita Falls, I'm sure you've seen the press about their project. It's also a direct project where they take wastewater directly from their wastewater plant. It goes through an advanced treatment process and blended with their supplies in a very similar way. And those are the only two direct potable reuse projects in the country, is Big Spring and Wichita Falls. So one other kind of reuse, just to round out the definitions, what we call in the industry de facto reuse. And this is the reuse that's been going on forever and ever. Reuse is not new. Forever and ever, as long as we've had entities discharging wastewater upstream and people pulling it out downstream to treat it, we've been reusing water, and we're not creating any new water. All water is ultimately reused, and so that's the concept behind de facto reuse. Another good thing to communicate to the public that this is not new. We've been reusing water forever, and a great example of that is right here in Texas, where we have folks in Dallas and Fort Worth using a lot of water and discharging a lot of water to the Trinity. And guess where that water goes? It goes right downstream to the Houston area, and they happily use that water as a water resource. And in the Trinity Basin, it's a battle for that water. It used to be something a waste that you get rid of, and it's now a valuable water resource that the Houston and Dallas-Fort Worth area have negotiated about how much water the Dallas-Fort Worth area discharges and leaves in the river for Houston, and how much they can keep for themselves to meet their water supply needs. So a great example of reuse that's been going on for a long time. Okay, and then finally, before I get into San Angelo itself, just to let you know, there's all kinds of potable reuse projects in place throughout the United States, primarily in the more arid regions, but Texas has been a leader in that area. We have a number of indirect reuse, potable reuse projects. We've got the only 2 direct potable reuse projects, and part of the reason that we've been able to do that is, quite frankly, we have a regulatory climate that allows that to happen, whereas if you look at California right now with their drought, implementing projects like these is such a challenge for them. And so we should feel fortunate that we have that kind of regulatory climate to be able to implement these projects. Okay, so let me talk about San Angelo now, because I know that's what you're all here for. A little bit of background. We actually helped the city with a feasibility study back in 2006 looking at reuse. So this is not a new thing for San Angelo. And in that study, at the time, there's a lot that has changed with respect to reuse, understanding, research, and technology that's happened between that time and now. There's been a tremendous amount of research that's taken place in the last 10 to 15 years looking at potable reuse in particular. At the time, in 2006, we had more emphasis looking at non-potable alternatives than we did in the current study. But we also looked at some potable alternatives. But at the time, nobody was thinking that direct potable reuse was an option. It just wasn't something that would be considered at that time. The understanding of the technology just wasn't there yet. And so we looked at 2 indirect reuse options, one a discharge to O.C. Fisher and a discharge to Twin Buttes. Well, O.C. Fisher was eliminated pretty early on because there wasn't water in O.C. Fisher. And so we focused on the Twin Buttes option and also looked at the potential of aquifer storage and recovery, which is when you discharge it into the ground and then pull it out again. And that turned out to not be a very viable option either. So the recommended alternative at the time was a discharge to Twin Buttes, combined with some non-potable reuse, so where it made sense to pull off of the pipeline that would go to Twin Buttes. So now, zooming forward to 2015, in the current feasibility study, we were focusing on the potable reuse options as the main option because the yield of water supply you can get out of a potable reuse option is significantly greater than non-potable. Non-potable requires a lot of infrastructure to pipe water to different users who won't use it all the time. They don't, and particularly in a drought, that may not be the highest level of use that you're looking to support. And so we focused on potable reuse alternatives and then did a little evaluation to look at were there any non-potable alternatives that made sense based on our recommendation for potable reuse. And the feasibility study followed a typical scope for feasibility study. Of course, we got together and looked at a number of alternatives, and then we developed costs for each of these alternatives and went through a ranking process to rank the alternatives and selected a recommended alternative and then outlined a plan for how the city could move forward. So looking at the alternatives that we evaluated, this slide shows the existing supplies essentially schematically coming into the system. And the wastewater treatment facility is over here, and the water treatment plant is here. So you've got your Twin Buttes and Nasworthy supplies, you've got Hickory water coming in, you've got Ivy water coming in. You could, if there was water and if the pipeline was upgraded, bring Spence water in, and you've got your O.C. Fisher. So the wastewater gets conveyed over to the wastewater treatment plant. Right now, that water from the wastewater treatment plant, there's some big ponds up north of the plant that the water goes to, and then that water is disposed of or used for irrigation to the irrigation district, or the city also has irrigation land that they can use to get rid of the water. So none of that water is discharged at this point to a stream. It's never been discharged, and it's all used for irrigation, essentially. So the alternatives that we looked at, we met with the city and talked through what we thought were the most viable alternatives for potable reuse, and then evaluated those in detail. The first one was to pick up on the alternative that we had recommended in the 2006 study, reevaluate that. So it's an IPR alternative to pipe the water up to Twin Buttes. The second one was similar, but to take the water to Nasworthy instead of Twin Buttes. And there are some differences there. The water quality standards that the TCEQ has for the water in Nasworthy are different, and actually allow for a little bit more flexibility than the Twin Buttes standards. And so there were some differences in water quality that we were looking at there. And of course, the conveyance costs would be less. The pipeline is shorter. And then the third alternative that we looked at was direct potable reuse. So this was, Bill's got our draft report. There's a lot of work that went into this. I'm not going to get into the details, but we looked at a number of issues, the water quality issues. We looked at the water rights issues. We looked at how much what the yield of each project would be. We looked at what the treated water quality would be, which is actually, a significant consideration about what the blended quality would be for each different project and what the benefit was there. And we went through a process where we combined all the different criteria that we felt were important and went through an actual evaluation process to select the recommended alternative. Ease of permitting is a key issue. Once you discharge the water into these reservoirs, not only there's water rights issues, you have to get a discharge permit from the TCEQ, and those two things take time, and you're not guaranteed with the water rights that you'll get all the water back. Not only that, you're discharging into water that's difficult for the city to treat now, and just creates, you're essentially dirtying up the reuse water by putting it into those lakes. So all those things, taking into consideration all those factors, in addition to cost and non-cost factors, the recommendation that we all agreed on was to move forward with direct potable reuse. So, and I'm just going to schematically show you that recommendation here. So again, we've got the wastewater treatment plant and the water treatment plant. The first thing for direct potable reuse is that there need to be some upgrades at the wastewater plant. Essentially, you're now looking at your wastewater plant as having a different purpose. Before, the purpose of the wastewater plant is to treat the water to a level that you can dispose of it. And now you're looking at needing to treat that water to a level that will provide good treatment for the follow-on advanced treatment processes, and that requires some improvements. And the key improvements that would be required is to remove some nutrients from the wastewater. Nutrients in the water impact how the membranes in the advanced treatment function, and so you need to take those out. And then filtration, so just getting more of the small particles out of the water ahead of the advanced treatment. And then that would follow with the construction of an actual advanced treatment facility, similar to what you saw on the Big Spring slide, where we would have advanced treatment, which includes membrane treatment, ultrafiltration, and reverse osmosis, which essentially takes almost everything out of the water except for the H2O molecules, and then follow that with an advanced disinfection process. And this is really the standard of what's being done with potable reuse projects, direct potable reuse projects, and is what the TCEQ is going to require and expect to do this project. The benefit of that is that it takes salt out of the water, dissolved solids out of the water, and you all have a fairly high dissolved solids concentration in your source waters, particularly Lake Ivy and particularly in drought situations. And that was one of the factors that we really considered when doing the water quality evaluation. So when you go through this treatment process, you're taking almost all of those out, and it really improves the final blended water quality that you deliver to the customers in terms of the TDS. So from advanced treatment, then it would be piped over to the water treatment plant and blended with your existing supplies and go through the conventional water treatment process and then distributed to your customers. So schematically, that's what the project looks like. And then we've defined the project in 2 phases. The first phase was essentially use the entire amount of wastewater that's available now, and then we looked out to some projections. Depending on how much you grow, we costed out a second phase to add 3 more million gallons per day. So the first phase would have a capacity of 9 million gallons per day, and that's the actual source water. You lose some water through the reverse osmosis process, so roughly 80% of the water you will recover from that 9 MGD. And then we costed out a second phase that would add 3 more million gallons per day, so a second phase up to 12 MGD. So what I'm sure you've been waiting for, the projection of cost for the recommended alternative. I've got a few numbers here that I'll go through. The phase 1 for the 9 MGD, the capital cost of almost $137 million. And that would put in place the infrastructure for phase 2. The capital cost for phase 2 is essentially adding in new treatment modules so that the capacity of the pipelines and the pump stations and so forth are all taken up in the phase 1 cost, and the phase 2 is just putting in new treatment modules and new pumps where they're needed. And then the life cycle cost here, which is a net present worth value, the life cycle cost incorporates the total cost of the project over a 50-year project life. So that's capital cost, that's operation and maintenance cost, it's replacement cost for facilities. So it's a number that we use when we're comparing alternatives to look at the total life cycle cost, because the cost of the project is not only the capital cost, there's some significant operation and maintenance costs associated with each of these alternatives, and that incorporates all those numbers into one number. And then I've shown the unit costs here based on the 50-year life cycle cost of the unit cost came out to be $1.87 per 1,000 gallons. But if you look at the cost for getting a loan on the initial phase 1 cost and the O&M associated with the phase 1, then you're looking initially, while you're paying off that debt, of a cost of $4.84 per 1,000 gallons.
So you're seeing the 484 is basically a 30-year.
Right.
Does the phase 1, does that include the upgrades to the wastewater plant?
It does. It includes everything. We tried to include everything in the project. It includes it all. And my understanding, this is comparable to what you saw on the Hickory Aquifer project. It's very comparable to what water supply costs in this part of the state. It's reality. Other questions on cost?
Okay, so I can be clear. We use how many gallons per day in San Angelo / Tom Green County? I don't know.
Right now, we're using a little over 11 MGD.
Okay.
That'll go up, obviously, a little bit.
So if it's 11 and you're using the number of 9 million gallons per day.
But 9 is not your supply, 80% of 9.
80% of 9,
Yeah.
so 7
So
million.
7, yeah.
7 million
7
2.
to 8, yeah.
So whatever that is, 60% or 65% of what our daily use is. Ballpark number. Okay.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think what Bill's saying is it'll be higher in the summer. you'll have a,
Yeah, we can get up to 14, 15 in the summer. And of course, that's just for what's coming out of the treatment facility, correct?
Correct.
That doesn't include outlying areas at this point, correct?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're.
Well, maybe the question is, are we still selling water to Miles?
We're selling water.
UCRA is.
Through
UCRA.
UCRA.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
We
The,
treat water for UCRA, but that is included in that number.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay,
One- One other question, please.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. That life cycle cost was for what time period did you?
a 50-year, we
50,
assumed a
okay,
50-year
thank
life.
So can that facility actually last with upgrades and maintenance 50 years? Or what do you really anticipate on? I mean, how do you look that far forward to see what we need 10, 15 years from now from an equipment standpoint?
That cost includes replacing equipment. So each piece of equipment is assigned a different life based on
Okay.
the equipment.
So it's
and
totally
then there's
factored
a
in.
replacement cost
Okay.
that's added in.
And I'll just add one other comment on costs. Abilene has just come online, as Ellen mentioned, and Alan Plummer was teamed with us on that project. Abilene spent about, these are just rough numbers, $100 million to bring that 7 million gallon per day facility online. So if you look at the ratio between 7 to 9 and the 100 million to the 136, unfortunately, that's just what it's costing to develop these sources. Our friends over in Midland spent about $200 million on their T-bar well field. If you remember, that's about a 20 million gallon per day facility roughly, so about $10 million per million gallons, and that's groundwater that doesn't require additional treatment. So these projects, that's kind of the rule of thumb that we're using with the West Texas Water Partnership and others, that $10 to $15 million per million gallons of usable or of capacity is kind of the ballpark that this is in. So looks like a big number, but I think if you would look at the Hickory costs, it's going to pan out to about the same $10 to $15 million per million gallons, just to put it in perspective.
Okay, I have one more slide here to discuss schedule. In the report, we put in a schedule that essentially we considered to be a comfortable schedule. If you had time, this is how you would like to do it, because as you start compressing the schedule, it costs money to do that. And so this is what's in the report. If you get a bunch more rain, then maybe this is possible, but if you don't get rain, I think if you decide to move forward with the project, this is going to need to be compressed, and there are ways to compress it. But the process is, for the advanced treatment, for the membrane treatment, you have to pilot those units because they're very specific. Their performance is very site-specific based on the actual water quality that's feeding into it. And so there's essentially a 9 to 12 month piloting process that has to take place to evaluate exactly what kind of pre-treatment is needed, what chemical treatment is needed, and look at a number of vendors for those units. And so that's the first step that has to take place, and then you can move into the permitting and design process. And at the end of that permitting and design process, there's a key regulatory milestone where the TCEQ will give you permission to construct the facility. So all this piloting and design, there will be, a lot of interaction with the TCEQ throughout that process, because right now the TCEQ doesn't have rules for direct potable reuse. They handle it on a case-by-case basis. And so we've already had one meeting with them to sort of introduce the project and let them know that it's a potential, and get their feedback, and it was very positive. So after construction approval, then you go into construction, of course, and then there's a startup process to make sure everything's working properly. So where things can be compressed, the pilot testing, there can be some overlap between the pilot testing and the design. So we can compress that some. You can do, instead of going through a standard design bid build process, you can look at other alternatives for constructing the project. Construction manager at risk is what was used in Abilene to really compress that schedule. So there's ways to make the design and the construction overlap as well and compress the schedule. But as I mentioned, that comes at a cost, and so what would be the best scenario would be that you get enough rain that you can follow a schedule like this, but you've got to be able to bring the public along if you get the rain, the issue we were talking about earlier, to make sure that they're prepared for the next drought if you move forward with the project. So I think that's the last slide I have at this point. I have a video to show you all to kind of get you in the mood for reuse. This is a video that was produced by the Water Reuse Association, and I want to show it to you, but it's a tool that can be used with the public too if there are people that have concerns about reuse and the water quality issues associated with it. So
I have a question.
yeah.
What percentage of, what blended percentage are you kind of projecting? If you're doing the 9 MGD, that would come out to about 7.2 MGD.
Right.
I mean, are we looking at trying to use the max of that, or kind of like we're doing with the Hickory, where we float it, we fluctuate it based upon our groundwater, our surface water that we have available at the time? I mean, what's kind of the philosophy that you see?
I may let Bill, I just want to make one point before I let Bill answer this. The membranes, you have to run some water through them all the time. They're-
Similar to our Hickory.
Right,
yes.
but you don't have to run the full capacity, and so there's that caveat.
Right, obviously, it would have to run some as the Hickory, so we'd always have some water coming from both of them. But I think the thought process that we have is that this is water that we would need when we need it. If there's water in the lakes, that's what we would use primarily. So the blending would depend on how much water we have to bring in from other sources. Obviously, we'd want to use this as necessary to maximize those sources and use them as efficiently as possible. But I don't know if there was some sort of, I don't think there was a specific design issue there. I think it's more of an operational issue, and I think that's how we would anticipate using it. That if we didn't need it, we wouldn't use it.
And so operational costs really aren't going to fluctuate a whole lot based upon the MGD you're running through there at any one time. Again, similar to Hickory right now, your operational costs are going to be pretty flat. They may go up slightly, but it's not going to be, if we're only using a third of our volume, it's not going in half, and I know that.
I think that would be a fair statement. A lot of those are fixed costs, and if you're
Right.
operating it, you're going to have those costs. There will be some variable costs in there, but not a lot. So I think you're correct.
We got one question before you start the video. What are you going to do with the brine, the waste?
Yeah, I didn't talk about that. We looked at a couple of alternatives that needs to be fleshed out more in the next phase, but we were comfortable enough that there will be an alternative. So we looked at potential of evaporation ponds, and we looked at deep well injection as the primary alternatives. We looked at the potential of a surface discharge, and unfortunately there's just not a good surface water in the vicinity. Big Spring's
lucky because they got Bill's Creek, and
Exactly.
the TDS levels are so high they can discharge straight to the
Exactly,
creek. But
and
that's
so
not the case in our.
You don't have that advantage, unfortunately, unless you want to pipe it all the way up there, but that's expensive too. So one of the things that has to happen in the next phase is to get and evaporation, I think, is doable, but it's expensive, and it doesn't scale based on size because it just takes a certain amount of area to evaporate water. The injection wells can, there's an economy of scale potentially with injection wells. So the next phase needs to look at in more detail at the viability of the injection well option. And also just on the injection wells, there was a bill passed this session that will make permitting of them easier, and so that's a benefit too. But obviously, that's a key component of the project is what you do with the brine concentrate. Good question.
So Chuck, the injection well, somewhere in Tom Green County, we're not talking about going further north where there's some current injection wells, or is that an
There's a
option?
lot
On your
of
property, aren't we?
Yeah. What do you think, man?
There's a lot of oil and gas injection wells right in the vicinity
So
of
we
the,
can-
the plant. It's a matter of making sure that formation can
hold that
the
amount.
volume is much greater for this
Yeah.
kind of project and more consistent. So,
Talking a couple of thousand acre-feet a year.
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
right.
Thanks.
I'd like to go back onto my original, my question that, maybe just a follow-up, is that if our operational costs, I understand there's clear definition of why we lower the volume of hickory water that we take. It's groundwater, and it's not going to evaporate. So the less we use, the more we're going to have for later use. Now, the wastewater, we're going to have basically, essentially a fixed cost of operational cost. And so we're going to be set in place with that. Now, that's not going to fluctuate. And again, what would the plan be that if we do cut that from wanting to do 9 MGD to say 4 on a regular basis, what would you do with the rest of it? What we're currently doing now to try to satisfy, again, the canal folks, or what? You see my question?
No, absolutely, and one that we've discussed.
Because
with
it comes
the
back to
consulting
that
team
maybe you
internally.
might be better to actually, and again, the question would come back, if you, instead of a direct, if you had an overflow, would it make sense to do an indirect at that point with the overflow?
We and
Just
that's
asking.
that's you're bringing up an option that we actually looked at and is a potential to look into, and that is potentially discharge into right there by the plant, discharge into the concho right by the plant. And right now, there's some releases that have to be made, that are required to be made from the Twin Butte system. And one option would be to trade some water for those
Right.
releases. So keep it in the Twin Butte system to trade it. Another option would be to look at letting it flow all the way to Ivy and maybe trying to work something out there too. But that's, that has a number of issues. But I think it's, it's an evaluation of the value of each of your water supplies and the individual contractual conditions on each one, and what makes the most sense for the city in whether to use that facility to capacity or to back it off some when it's in wetter conditions.
Well, but again, back on the operational, and I'm looking at the cost, but beyond that is even the life cycle of the equipment, that if you're not maximizing the equipment, is the life cycle going to possibly extend? You're not running a motor at 100% every
Right.
single day. If you're running it at 50% or even alternating between different units, is that going to, over the long term, lower our net overall cost? Just again,
Yeah.
goes back into that entire discussion. I know I'm digging down weeds right now, so.
No, but you're right. But you still got to look at maximum cost. You still got the $136 million.
Right.
And that's what everything's got to be looked at and figured off of. The rest of it's alternatives that may or may not happen.
Agreed.
That's absolutely correct, and they're really good points, and we've been batting those around a lot, is, okay, if we don't use it, at times we don't need it, what's the best alternatives on how to use it from operational, from water supply, all of those issues, and we'll be working through those for sure, because they're all real issues that we have to deal with. But I think you're right, Mr. Boyd, that the initial cost is what it is. That's
One question that I have, do you know, speaking of costs, do you know if is there any federal funding for this project, or is it in the Region F water plan? I didn't know if you knew any of that.
It is in the Region F water plan.
It
Correct.
is in the Region F water plan. It's actually in the the new water plan, we are trying to get it actually amended to be in the 2012 plan as well.
Right. It's in the initially prepared plan, which hasn't been finalized yet.
Okay.
With respect to federal funding, the main source would be through the Bureau of Reclamation. They have a special program, called a Title 16 funding program for reuse projects. The problem with that is that there is a line a mile long of people waiting to get funding, and many of them are in California and have significant political influence with the Bureau and on Capitol Hill. So I think the chances of getting into that are pretty slim. Although the fact that you have a reclamation lake is one tiny little benefit, but I think, especially on a short-term basis, it's unlikely. There is the state, the development board funding, which is a loan program, but it's a good interest rate that you can get, so that helps some. And I know the city's pursuing those options.
Is that 30-year 3% that you showed on your
No,
slide?
that
Or
was
is
just a
that's
number I
just a
kind
measurement you
of,
pulled?
yeah, but that's a ballpark. It could be lower with the development board, the interest rate could be, yeah.
Okay.
One other point I wanted to make before I show the video is if San Angelo decides to move forward with this project, it's not a project that you want to just kind of do halfway. So it needs to be a commitment to do it and do it right. And I want to emphasize that the operating an advanced treatment facility with membranes requires kind of a higher level of sophistication in operations and a commitment to have the staff to operate it well and to do the monitoring that you need to do. This can be done safely and really well, but it takes a commitment to do that. So you don't want to just say, we want to go in and cut corners. This isn't the kind of project to cut corners on, so.
Totally
Well-
agree.
Mr. Chairman, one more question. Refresh my memory of the figures between Hickory and this reuse project. Can we cover the average daily use in San Angelo?
We could, and the Hickory right now, we can, it'll treat 8 MGD. Now, if we had to do that right now, as we talked about last meeting, we would be depleting the banked water. But between the Hickory and this project, we could meet our daily average daily use. Yes, sir.
Using proportions too, not even diving too heavy into the banked.
Correct.
Because proportional, again, with the Hickory, that's, I mean, as some years go down, is going to be, what, about 4 to 5 MGD? I mean, isn't that kind of that there's a number out there where there's a base allocation that we were adjudicated?
That's the number
Right, the
that's in the Region
allocation,
F plan.
it's
Okay.
4 to 5, yeah.
Right, it's 2,700 acre feet right now. It goes to 5,000 next, as far as the allocation.
But that's in 26, correct?
Yeah, it goes-
21.
21.
Yeah, 18%, roughly my number, but 18% of the Hickory, and then what you're talking about, 80% of reclamation, that gets us to 90-something% of our daily water use at the 15,000 acre feet per year.
That's
Ballpark.
close.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying, those two sources. If it's all a perfect world, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
What are you guys expecting and wanting from us today?
We can get right into that. If you go back to the schedule.
I'm sorry, I hate to,
That's okay.
I like to
No,
see the
but
bottom
we
line.
need to see where we
Absolutely.
want
I
to
would
go.
like you to see the video, though, because I
will.
think
Sure,
it's a
sure.
very good
Sure.
public education tool. And this schedule is, one of the things that we wanted to do was talk about, okay, if we started this project, is there any bailouts? Is there a point that, thank you, is there a point that if we started the project and everything filled up and we said, okay, we can put this on hold a little bit while we deal with the Hickory, debt and those things. Are there ways to do that? And so the schedule kind of shows that. The pilot is projected to be 9 to 12 months. And then after that, you have permitting and design. So anywhere in that process, I guess, between the piloting and in the design, you could say, okay, we can stop and we can put this on hold. But obviously, once you get to construction, you're committed. So this kind of gives you an idea of how that might work. What I would like today to recommend to you that you recommend that we proceed with the piloting. Now, I don't know that means today to me that we're going to be spending 9 to 12 months doing that before we do anything else. I think we'll continue to talk about this. As Ellen said, the permitting and design can start, parallel with that. But the one thing that we can't do is move forward until we have the piloting done. So I would think that we would need to start that process sooner rather than later.
Cost of the piloting estimate?
1 point something.
Okay.
Probably a good estimate's 1.1, 1.2 million.
Okay.
And how would you pay for that?
We're working on that. It's one of those things that at this point I think we need to do. So I think we need to find the funding for it and proceed.
So the bottom line that'll come down from a consumer standpoint is upon completion of projects somewhere down the road by 2020, what's it going to cost an average household additional in water expense?
Right.
And we've got to come up with that. I mean, that's the first question anybody's going to ask.
We do, and as I mentioned last meeting as well, that we're doing the rate study, and we're going to take these numbers kind of as a separate issue and fold that in so that we can show specifically what these different water supply projects will do to.
Well, wouldn't it 4.84 for
Yeah.
the
per
30 year?
thousand.
Wouldn't that be the cost per thousand?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's the basic
Basic.
answer.
I mean,
Right.
I know it's not exact, but it would be
Right. I mean,
in that vicinity, and that's basically what we put on people for the Hickory.
Correct.
Yeah.
Very, very similar.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. For Bill. So I mean, are you going to determine a fatal flaw in the pilot testing? I mean, it's not going to prevent us. So here's, my thought is, I mean, of course, the board may say, we may want to study this further, perhaps we want more information, but I think we ought to pull the trigger and be all in, as opposed to all we're doing now is the pilot testing, and let's determine at the end of the pilot testing whether we want to move forward with the permitting and design and construction and so forth. That's kind of my sentiment.
I agree with you completely. I would
Never
not in any way say to you that I think that we wait a year. I think we'll be continuing to talk about this at the next meeting and seeing if we continue to move forward with the rest of the project.
I mean, we're making a recommendation to the council. You've got to go find the money.
Right.
Okay? So I think we'll have a vote for you today before we leave, at least.
I think this gets us started with the project.
Education, and one more, education process and how we release that education process to the public is going to be really important. How Anthony does that and how we framework that instead of just coming out and saying, it's going to cost the individual guy or person this amount of money. We need to go back to your slides and figure out how we're going to framework that to start that process over a series of releases in the paper and the media. Here's where we are, here's where we think we're going to be. You know where we've been. Now let's figure out how we're going to get there. In order to do that, then we start with this.
Mike, a question for you. If all your projections are based upon 9 MGD currently, utilizing a 9 MGD, to go from a 9 MGD, say that the initial projection maybe we don't want it to be 9, maybe we want it to be 7. Only reason I'm asking that is because there are other potential projects on the table that we could look at, like the Red Arroyo, which might be a cheaper cost. Now, it's a risk. There's no guarantee we would get it. But, again, I'm just trying to lay out options that would that change that 137 million down to 130 million, or would it be maybe to 110 million?
And I'll definitely step aside and let them.
You see my question I'm
Absolutely,
asking?
and let them answer that question. My first reaction to that is, I mean, I think it's a legitimate question and evaluation, but we do need to consider in looking at these alternatives that one is a guaranteed
Yes.
and one has risks. And so I'm not sure that we want to sacrifice one for the other. I think they would work, I mean, I think we need to look at the maximum amount on this because we know that's water. But I'll let Ellen speak to the cost on that.
Yeah, first one comment, the 9 is the initial capacity. I think
Understand.
that the flows right now are not quite at 9, so we put in a little buffer there on the first capacity. But yeah, if you were to scale down the capacity, the cost would scale down. I can't give you a number.
But not proportionally,
Not totally proportionally, no, that's right.
meaning you take 70% of that value, it's not going to come down 30%.
Right, it's
No,
not,
You got a base cost.
I
period.
realize you still got a
Yeah.
building, you still got technology
Exactly.
and infrastructure and.
right.
I understand all that. And I wouldn't be in favor of not designing it to add to those points. I'm simply saying, instead of, you've got a phase, you had it in there as a phase 1 and a phase 2. Just as a thought, we may want to look at, there's a phase 3. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right, and that could be done.
Okay.
I don't think that's a significant change in the evaluation. I think we can certainly look at it.
And I know it wouldn't change the pilot testing either. That still would go on.
I have a question for you. And Bill, so can you walk us through, you get a vote from us today and an approval. What are the next steps that you have to take? Do you have to go to the city council for their approval and then?
That's correct.
Okay.
And find the
would
money.
we would take your recommendation to the council to move forward, and then we would immediately, we've already been looking at how we're going to fund this. The rate study that we're doing clearly plays a role in this. The city can't fund that without, additional rates to do that. So that's part of this process as well.
And when is that rate study going to be available?
I mentioned at the last meeting I was hoping to bring something to you at the end of this month. I doubt if that's going to happen, so I'm still shooting for early July anyway. So,
Okay.
But on a positive, we have water in the lakes,
yes.
and people are buying a lot of water. Am I correct? So the surplus, the water, what account is that? The
Oh, as far as revenue?
Yeah.
Well, it's not,
you're still
it's
not.
not like we're doing a lot of irrigating. No, we're still below projections. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to look at the
Other
video?
questions? You want to watch the video?
Please.
Cross our fingers that it works. Tested it twice before. Best plans.
Here comes the technology guy to save the day.
Timed out, apparently. I have to watch that. Yeah.
Is that ironic? That is for whiskey.
Thanks, Ms. McDonald. Appreciate it.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to recommend that we proceed with the project first with the pilot, or however we want to package it and say proceed with the project, and then we
Sure.
go from there. Or however-
Questions or comments from the board? Anyone?
So we're basically choosing to,
We'd
as a board, to recommend to them to pursue this.
recommend to the council that we pursue with the pilot project and they find funding for that source. Would that be correct?
Yes, sir. My thoughts are is that's the beginning, and I think we've got some more work to do before we say that we're going to, full speed ahead on the project. But I think we need
Okay.
at least
Good. That
start
was
with
the
this.
clarification I was looking for. so.
Start with the pilot,
Right.
and then we'll work out what the next steps are.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. Further discussion?
Do you need a clarification of what the motion exactly is, that we're proceeding?
Motion to
Recommending the.
recommended to proceed with the pilot testing.
And that, obviously, that will include contracting with the
Correct.
firm to do that.
Yes.
Okay. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good presentation.
Next item. Red Arroyo.
As we talked about at the last meeting, as well as the Red Arroyo project that was just mentioned, which is something that needs to continue to be studied. And one of those things we need to do is to put a gauging station in there to actually be able to monitor and see what's flowing, so we can make some good decisions on how much water would actually be a part of there.
Where would that be located?
Here's my thought, Chairman. We've got a groundwater study that's going to take possibly up to a year. And let's say the engineers say that does prove out that it is viable still. Well, then the other concern is the volume of water. And in order to do that, we're going to probably take another year or two to measure that by a third party. So my thought was, why don't we go ahead and do these together? So let's go ahead and vet this thing, whether it's going to work or not. I'd like to make a recommendation to get USGS, who does the actual gauging stations of all the lakes and reservoirs in the area, to install a gauging station there somewhere around the South Concho or South Chadburn Bridge to quantify that water. I talked to Kerry Carmen, who is in the USGS office here in San Angelo, and he said it cost $25,000 to put in a station and then $15,500 per year to operate it. So we're looking at $40,000 basically.
How would you pay for it?
Would that be?
Question.
Mhm.
So that was 25,000 installation and
Installation.
15,000 per year for operation?
And they would
Correct.
maintain that.
Okay.
And they would maintain all that.
True independent.
Yep.
Okay.
And like I say, that's what everybody gauges all their lakes and rivers all over Texas with them.
And I guess, Mike, why waste 8 months? When we talked last month, we said it's going to take another 8 months to do the study. Maybe I was wrong, but somewhere between 8 months and a year, and then we'll wait another year to get an answer to determine if it's a viable project. Marry those together, recommend that we allow you to go find that funding source to pay for that $40,000 plus, and let's get an answer.
I agree completely.
So-
You think you can find the money?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Jonathan, everybody okay? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries to proceed.
Good job.
Thank you. Okay, future agenda items. Anything else y'all want to take on at this time? Anybody? I know we got to talk about, we'll set the date for the next meeting, but I'd also like to try and set a date for us to tour the facility. I haven't seen it, and I want to go out there, and whether we do it after our next meeting and set that time while we're here. I mean, our schedules are already set, so if that's possible,
Absolutely.
after we have our next meeting, whether we go tour that and then meet about it or whatever and to talk, but I think we ought to get it done.
How about July 8th?
Any idea when you're gonna think you're gonna have some of the rate study done?
I would anticipate bringing it in.
You
To
think-
that July meeting?
Yes.
Okay. You think you may have it by then? I'm just asking. I mean, to me, that's a big deal. That's a
It
real
is a big deal. It is. I actually had a conversation with a consultant that's doing that yesterday, and that was our discussion to try to have, if not completely wrapped up, at least be able to have enough of it to talk about real numbers and real impacts at that time.
That was my only point on whether it's the 8th or the 15th or whatever. That I think it's important for us to address that. That's the significance I see. So, my point is that if you need another week,
Yeah, take
Sure.
it.
let's take the other week right
Let's
now.
go to the 15th, and I mean, I
That's
can.
all
I
I'm,
can use
all I'm
it.
trying to say. I think it's that important that we,
Okay. Then that certainly helps that, so if we go to the 15th.
because
Everybody
I think
okay?
at the end of the day, what we, while we talk about all these projects and everything's going on and all the funding, one of the other aspects that we need to get into, and I want to talk about at the next one is, even when you get into drought level 2 type situations, you still should be on an even keel. And that comes back to the rate structure
Right.
and how it's all set up. I know usage could drop through the floor, but you still, based upon an average of projection with a little bit of a buffer, you should be able to at least
That's correct.
pay the bills. Drought level 3, maybe a different story. That's why I believe it's important, because we got to make sure that through all this, you're funded properly.
Correct.
Is everybody okay with the 15th? Let's set the 15th.
15th, or, I thought he said 8th.
Well, he's talking about giving him another week to make sure we
Okay,
have
okay.
the draft on the rate study.
Sorry,
But
okay.
let's see if that'll work. You okay?
15 works for me, yes.
Jonathan, you okay? Okay, let's set the date for the 15th at 9 a.m.
Okay.
Okay. Other business to come before us today? Anybody? If not, we're adjourned. Thank y'all very much.